Welcome everyone to Brady Ware's October webinar. This month we're featuring Terry Schuer, our own variable operations consultant, and it's going to be on F&I compliance and best practices. As F&I becomes more and more a larger percentage of the variable operations profit, it's really important to have your F&I department running correctly and also stay in compliance as well. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Terry.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for tuning into October's edition of our monthly webinar series here at Brady Ware. This month, as Sam said, we're going to be focusing on compliance responsibilities that exist in the sales and F&I departments of today's automotive, RV, and power sports dealerships that we deal with routinely. As a way of introduction, my name is Terry Schuer, and I am the variable operations consultant for the Brady Ware Dealership Advisors team. The first 22 years of my career were spent inside the dealership under various different roles, ranging from salesperson, sales manager, GSM, GM, and eventually the director of a 5-store group. And I spent 6 months in the accounting office billing out deals and doing title work. So if it happens on the front end of the business, the odds are that I've probably experienced it before. However, I'm just like anyone else, and most of the best lessons I've learned have been coming from fixing mistakes I've made in the past and establishing processes to make sure that we didn't make them again. And so over the past 5 years, I've spent most of my time working closely with various types of dealers, focusing strongly on their F&I departments. And we've been able to help dealers grow and PVR and product penetrations while maintaining a compliant sales and F&I process. So if you add all that up, I've spent 27 years intimately involved with the automotive business and can testify that there is no better business in the world. And that being said, there are very few industries that have undergone the regulation and scrutiny in the last 20 years that we have at the dealership level. And staying on top of those changes has been very difficult for us, because everybody that works in a dealership, it seems like it's enough to get all your daily duties done every day, and by the time that's done, you're spent. And so staying on top of the regulation, it's one of the reasons why we're here to help everyone out. And today we're selling new and used vehicles with warranties, and we're considered a creditor under the law, as most may or may not know, and because a lot of our retail installment contracts we are the lender, and then we sell those loans off to different banks technically. And we're doing a lot nowadays with recalls and how we are selling cars with open recalls on them, and we're making sure that we try to minimize that as much as possible. Document retention, identity theft, they're just a few of those things that we're trying to button up on a daily basis, and I know it's very difficult to stay on top of. You had employee turnover, pressure to deliver more and more units to hit the number. It seems like we all have to hit the number anymore to be profitable, and then the government has a constant desire to either add or upgrade their laws and regulations, and it's easy to see really why many dealers have opted to have one person inside the stores designated as a compliance officer. And large operations may have a dedicated person for this role, while many dealers, they might take somebody and add this responsibility to them. Typically they'll pick somebody who is proven and trustworthy and more likely to be employed at the dealership for an extended time. That way we have some continuity in dealing with what the dealership's processes are. So whether you have a dedicated person or just a person to whom you're adding these responsibilities to their normal duties, the point is that you need a compliance champion, someone who can separate himself or herself from the heat of the moment and make sure that the dealership is taking steps to minimize its exposure to potential fines, imprisonment, bad publicity, and business devaluation that can develop into fruit from a poisonous or non-compliant tree. And in most cases, this position can be added without creating additional expense, but having a hall monitor, so to speak, is definitely a recommended best practice here at Brady Ware. Someone needs to inspect what you expect. For more information on how to best establish this position, just please feel to reach out directly. My information will be at the end of the webinar, but just contact me directly and we'll discuss it in greater detail on how it could work for you and your organization. So the question becomes, well, what should I be inspecting? And what we'll be covering over the next few minutes are some of the common sense best practices that we've developed through the years. If monitored routinely, you should find your staff to be able to easily comply with these steps, and these processes will become a great foundation for your compliance program. And so I always like to start where the car deal starts and kind of work through the customer's journey. And today in 2019, most of your customers' buying process starts online, and many dealers, they have the option available for their websites for customers to apply for credit there. And many of these tools, then they'll go from the website after the customer puts all their information in. These tools import the customer's private information directly into the dealership CRM tools, and then with a couple clicks of a button, they go directly into DealerTrack where the dealership personnel can see them. And so, many dealers have staff they're anxious to fully qualify the value of the lead. They want to know if the customer can buy or not, and they'll pull the customer's credit with no regard to the compliance steps that are required as soon as they hit that submit button. So for starters, the first recommendation is to make sure that your customers need to acknowledge that the dealer may review their credit file. And you should have a disclaimer on the website that's very, very similar to a disclaimer that you're going to see at the bottom of a credit application. As a matter of fact, some dealers have just mirrored the language from their credit application to be a disclaimer. But having the customer select that as an option is very, very important. And personally, I would tell you that I discount the need for dealers to actually pull credit until the customer arrives at the dealership. If you apply the same mindset to the finance application lead as you would to all other types of leads, most dealers understand that the primary goal of any lead is to secure an appointment for the customer to actually show up at the dealership. After all, we cannot sell a car without them coming into the store physically, at least not yet. And many dealers have guaranteed credit approval programs anyway. So even if you do not, consider the fact that the customer may have sent that same credit inquiry to 5 other dealers, and they're sitting back watching everyone work hard to get them approved without providing 100% correct or accurate information. In other words, they're just going to shotgun it out to dealers and then let the dealers go to work. But most of the valuable information received to get that credit approval for the customer is going to be received during a professional credit interview, and that's performed by a well-trained dealership staff member. And in my opinion, that's the most efficient and compliant way to handle that finance lead. Instead of just taking the lead in and then having your finance department go to work for half a day to try to get somebody approved, only to realize that there is missing information or things that could have been come to light later in the fact. It's just easier to set an appointment and have that customer come in. Although I tell you, there are many times when receiving the information online is very, very handy, like cases where a cosigner or a spouse may not be present at the dealership at the time as the other buying parties are there. And we'll see that quite often. And so what we always recommend, instead of taking an application over the phone, is having that missing party go to the website and complete the application there. It's far superior than taking the information over the phone, because applications received online at least have a documented disclaimer that the customer is agreeing to, and documenting a proper disclosure for credit authorization over the phone is nearly impossible to enact in real dealership life. And so all dealers on the call, though, I will tell you, should do themselves a favor and silently observe the actual processes of gathering credit information and how their staff is pulling bureaus. I know I've been shocked many times by the lackadaisical efforts of the sales department in regards to having signed applications, or in the case of absent parties, making sure the potential borrower is even aware that the information is being used. For instance, I saw one the other day where the husband had all the wife's information written down, and the dealership accepted that and went ahead and processed it. And who knows if the wife even knew that was happening. And so silently observing that is just part of that way that you can inspect what you expect. And I know it's an old cliche, but it just works. And when it comes to compliance, it's something that has to happen. Because pulling the customer's credit file, it trips several other compliance-related actions that are required to happen. And I'll cover those items in detail a little bit later on in the call, but let's kind of get back to this sample transaction for now. And so, the customer is, they've finally shown up at the dealership. They've gone to the website or your reputation or the BDC, whatever, got them on the car lot. And once that customer is on the car lot, you are instantly governed by the Magnuson-Moss Act. And this one's pretty simple, but can be easily to run askew from. The Magnuson-Moss Act requires you to clearly display the warranty offered for each vehicle. And this applies even if you don't have a warranty offered, such as a used car being sold as is. And what a lot of people don't realize, it also applies to your new car inventory. So new cars are the easiest. To just make sure that every vehicle has a window sticker on it. The window sticker from the factory will have all the required information. However, in real life, what happens is those window stickers will get removed, oftentimes for overnight test drives or for spot deliveries that didn't go. And it's just something that you need to check that they didn't get removed and then not replaced. Used vehicles are easy as well. Just make sure that you have the most recent version of the buyer's guide that's required by the FTC. And for those that don't know, that FTC or buyer's guide window sticker for your used cars changed in January of 2018. Just need to make sure that they're all clearly displayed on each used vehicle. Make sure that you have the appropriate warranty section marked and that all the information is clearly legible. And then a signed copy of that, the customer needs to sign that for every car deal, and it needs to be placed in the deal file. But again, one of the things about that used car buyer's guide sticker is to make sure that it's completely filled out. There's a front and a back, and those need to be completely filled out, signed by the customer, put in the deal. A lot of times what I'll see is the violations of that Magnuson-Moss Act will occur when the sales department is changing the type of warranty offered during negotiations. So just remember that a warranty is offered at no charge, and according to the law, cannot be altered in the deal after it has been disclosed on the FTC sticker. So if your sales managers are negotiating the warranty out of the deal, you may want to pump the brakes on that practice. And as a side note, I can tell you from personal experience that if salespeople and sales managers are allowed to negotiate the warranty out of the deal, oftentimes they'll shortcut building the value of that warranty to the customer. And if they know it has to stay in the deal, then my experience has been that they'll sell the value a lot harder, and that we know that selling the value creates more gross profit and closes more deals. And so let's move on here for a second from the lot to the showroom. I think if you have more questions about that used car buyer's guide or how you obtain that FTC sticker, be sure to let me know. It's really easy. I'll be able to send you a link and get you there. But let's move into the showroom then, and kind of how your sales desk is quoting payments. And because payment quoting is, hey, that's a big one, and it can present some issues, because I think we've all heard the term payment packing. And payment packing is the process of building in hidden charges like service contracts, GAP, or anything else to inflate what that actual payment is. and payment packing is a highly illegal practice. So if your sales desk is doing that, we recommend you stop immediately. The thing about payment packing, though, is it's I describe it as the process of building in hidden charges, and so the key word there is hidden, because it's perfectly acceptable to quote payments at the sales desk that include a service contract or may include gap insurance. You just need to disclose those items on the worksheet. And so when you're disclosing those, you're going to say, okay, your payment's 72 at 355, 72 months, 355 per month, and that payment includes a 6-year, 100,000-mile vehicle service contract with 0 deductible. It just needs to be clearly disclosed on the worksheet. So nothing wrong with quoting payments with those things in them. Just make sure you're letting the customers know what's in there. And then also, most modern desking tools will have some type of range in that quoted monthly payment. And it's a commonly accepted practice for your range to not exceed $9 per month. And it's kind of an obscure number, but that's the number that has been derived. That is a compliant range. So $350 to $359 per month is totally acceptable. $350 to $370 a month is out of bounds. So you get that $9 range. And so whether the desking tool, though, is automated or not, it's recommended that all your worksheets have a disclaimer noting that all payments are pending credit approval, or a lot of times you'll see a WAC at the bottom for with approved credit. Another recommended best practice is to update the defaulted interest rates that are within your desking tool. They all have a standard rate that's in there, and that tool needs to be updated on a monthly basis. And most tools can allow you to separate it out between new and used, and we recommend using your average sell rate or the average rate the customer paid from the last 60 days. And so updating that routinely not only ensures that your desk is using relevant rates, but it also applies some logic to how you are arriving at the rates and payments you're quoting to customers. And a lot of times when we talk about compliance, we talk about treating all the customers the same, doing it the same way every time. So if you have a consistent process that you've documented, it really helps you if you have to defend yourself. And not to mention, and if you have an environment where interest rates are rising, a lot of times sales managers, they lag in that information. And so if they're updated on a monthly basis, it keeps their payments pretty current. And of course, you can always vary from those rates. But if you're going to vary from those rates in your desking tool, I recommend taking a credit application and verifying the customer has the ability to qualify for that rate first. So anyways, speaking of credit applications, let's circle back kind of about how we started earlier in the presentation. We talked about the online credit applications. And so it doesn't really matter if you obtain the credit application online or in person. It does not change the need for your staff to follow a few basic regulations every time. And so for starters, every time you pull someone's credit or conduct a credit transaction, you are required to comply with the red flag guidelines. And so the red flags rule is simply a process of identifying verification to ensure that we are doing business with who the customer actually says they are. And so under the red flag guideline, each institution or creditor must develop a program that will detect, prevent, or mitigate identity theft. And so most dealerships are receiving their red flags detection and guidance from DealerTrack or Route 1. The customer must have a score of 75 or higher on the report. And this is something that I see pretty commonly, which is DealerTrack or Route 1 will pull up the score, and most sales or F&I managers are blowing right by it and not even paying attention to it. So it has to be 75 or higher. And if the score is below 75, there'll be another couple buttons you can push that are a series of questions that they're prompted to help verify the customer's identity. And if a customer does not know the answers to the prompted questions, then the dealership must take additional steps to make sure that they verify that customer's identity. And by the way, that happens pretty routinely because the questions that come up, they're pretty obscure, and sometimes it's going to ask people to remember things from 20 or 30 years ago. And I'm not sure about the folks on the call, but I have a difficult time remembering what I had for breakfast, let alone what street I grew up on or what bank I banked in the mid 70s. And in many cases, no joke, those if you haven't seen those questions, ask them to pull you up next time they encounter this, because you're going to see them that they're kind of difficult for customers to answer. And so in the cases where your staff is confronted with that situation, I just always recommend using common sense and notating either right there on the printout or on another sheet of paper what steps you've taken to verify that customer's identity. And that can be something as simple as, these folks have bought 5 cars from us. I knew them. I went to high school with them. Whatever it happens to be, anything that you can do to identify that you know who that customer is and that they are who they say they are. And then moving on, kind of the next thing that happens when you take a credit application is you absolutely need to provide the customer with a risk-based pricing notification. And what the risk-based pricing notification is it just notifies the customer of where their score is in relationship to everyone else in the country's score, and it's simply printed out of Dealer Track or Route 1, but it's highly recommended that you retain a signed copy of that in the deal jacket or attached to the credit app in cases where the deal didn't go. But the customer does need to provide a risk-based pricing notification every time you pull their credit. And so also, if the customer's credit has been denied or the terms of the credit altered, the customer must receive an adverse action notice. And if the dealer has determined the customer will not qualify and as a result has not submitted the application to a lender, which happens quite often, then the dealership is obligated to send the customer that adverse action notice within 30 days. One of the things that I simply recommend is that all applications are submitted to a lender. This process ensures that the lender will provide an adverse action notice, but it also makes sure that the dealership staff is not predetermining or pre-qualifying how a lender may react to a customer's creditworthiness. Because I think we've all been surprised by the callback we receive from a bank sometimes when we think someone won't get approved, but they actually will. And so an important note of that is if you call the deal in to a lender, the lender will send them an adverse action notice and you will not need to. But if you do not call the deal in, then you will need to send an adverse action notice within 30 days. And again, a lot of times those adverse action notices can be printed out of Dealer Track or Route 1. And okay, so that covers red flags and adverse action, and finally let's cover the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, which is sometimes referred to as the Safeguards Rule. And this is a big one that a lot of dealerships do not have. The Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act requires the dealership to provide the customer a copy of the dealership's privacy notice every time the dealership collects a customer's non-public personal information. So every time you collect non-public personal information. So what that's going to do is your privacy policy should outline how you will safeguard the customer's personal information and needs to be provided every time you accept that non-public personal information. So if you capture a copy of a customer's driver's license, their insurance information, social security number, date of birth, etc., this means that you have to provide them a copy of that privacy policy. And that privacy policy, because a lot of times you're going to get copies of driver's license, insurance cards, even on cash deals, means that it needs to be on a signed copy of that should be on file for every type of deal, cash, finance, or lease. However, one of the other interesting parts of that is a lot of times we collect personal information on the sales floor, And sometimes those interactions with customers result in a sale, sometimes they don't. And even in the case where a sale is not consummated, if we've captured that non-public personal information, like a copy of a driver's license, the customer needs to be provided a copy of the dealership's privacy notice. And it's recommended that a signed copy of your privacy notice be stapled to the private information and kept in a special file for situations when the information was collected, but no deal was consummated. So a lot of times you're going to have copies of credit applications, worksheets, privacy notices, all those things stapled together, put in a dead deal file somewhere in your dealership. And so it's also important to note that every customer has to have that privacy notice, and every customer that you pull credit on has to have that adverse action notice sent to them. And so, so as we follow the kind of the road to the sale in this sample car deal, now you have a signed worksheet from the customer. We've pulled their credit, and they're ready to go into the F&I department. And your F&I manager should be trained to press pause for a moment and make sure that all the steps of your compliance program have been completed. And they're part of the last line of defense to make sure the dealership is protected. And so it's important to note that every customer, before you do business with them, needs to be cross-referenced to a list of known terrorists. And that list is compiled by the Office of Foreign Asset Control. It's commonly referred to as OFAC. You'll hear that all the time inside of a dealership, and the OFAC inquiry is typically run the same time as the credit bureau and red flags. However, and this is an area where a lot of dealerships are not in compliance, even cash deals need to have an OFAC report in them. You are just quite simply not allowed to conduct business with a known terrorist. And there are, if somebody gets a red flag or gets a hit on an OFAC, please let me know. I've never seen one myself. However, it is a federal law. You are not allowed to conduct business with a terrorist. And so even on cash deals, make sure that you cross-reference them to the OFAC list. DealerTrack has that. A lot of menu softwares have that. It's not a tough thing to do, but it is something that definitely needs to be done on every deal. And almost every F&I manager is compensated for the products they sell and the income they generate. And so from a compliance standpoint, there's no better presentation method than having a standardized F&I menu. So you just need to make sure that your F&I menu has some basic disclosure information on it, like the term, the base payment without any products, and the interest rate, the amount financed. A lot of times what I tell people is if you just look at the truth in lending box inside of a retail installment contract, pretty much most of those things are going to need to be in your menu disclosure. But most certainly having the term and the base payment and interest rate with no products needs to be included in that menu disclosure. And the menu is also a great way to prove that 100% of the available products were offered to the customer 100% of the time. So using a proper product disclosure or product declination form will further document the products the customer has chosen and which ones they have elected to decline. And I've had multiple cases where a customer may, 6 months after a deal, say we did not offer them a service contract, or they may have wrecked and totaled their vehicle, and they say we didn't offer them GAP. And having a signed declination form is a very important tool when they come back in, if you can show that to the customer. And so just to kind of summarize some of the topics we've covered, things that I look for in dealerships every day when I visit is, do you have a compliance champion? How are you treating your online credit apps? Or do all of that Magnuson and Moss Act, do all of your cars have the warranty sheet on them? What's the payment quoting from the sales desk process look like? What's your range? Are they packing payments? Are they not? The red flags rule, risk-based pricing and adverse action notices, privacy policies that common law dealerships have not developed now, along with OFAC and the menu. I touched on briefly in the introduction, selling vehicles with open recalls is a very, very recent hot topic. Just don't do it, or if you choose to do it, make sure you have a signed, fully disclosed process so that you can document where you've shown that to a customer. But I highly recommend making sure you get all recalls done before you do sell the vehicle. And so that's a quick rundown, somewhat quick, as quick as you can run through automotive compliance for your sales department. And, you know, here at Brady Ware, we remain committed to the success of our dealers. You'll see my information here on this slide, and don't hesitate to reach out to me and let me know if you have any questions or want me to come to the dealership and help you out.
Thank you, Terry. That was a lot of great information in a short amount of time, and very thorough. And as you can tell, there's, you know, F&I is a department where you can, like I said earlier, you know, add a lot of profit at the front end, but it also, if you don't dot your I's and cross your T's, it can you get step in it. So I appreciate all the good information, Terry, and offer everyone who does have questions to get Terry's contact information. He's a great resource in this area, and you know, happy to have him part of the Brady Ware Dealership Advisors team. Invite everyone for next month. It's our annual year-end business and tax update webinar. So I invite everyone back for next on November 14th for that webinar. So it should be a good one. It's always well received, and there's a lot of good stuff for this year as well. So let's talk to everyone next month.